Welcome to Ames Hall. Here we are on the campus, the former historic campus of Green Mountain College in Pulteney, Vermont, nestled in the foothills of the Taconic Mountains. I'm Leo Gibson, co-founder of BHAKTA Spirits. Today we're going to give you a brief overview of Armagnac as a category. What is this stuff? Well, Armagnac is the oldest produced spirit in the world, at least produced for beverage alcohol. You take a look at the map over my left shoulder, we see a map giving you an orientation of the Cognac and Armagnac regions located down in southwest France. Bay of Biscay forms the western boundary of the region here. We've got the Pyrenees Mountains that form the boundary with Spain, 10,000 feet high. Even in the middle of June, you can stand in the grape fields, the vineyards here in Armagnac and look up and see the snow-capped peaks. Off to the east further, we have the city of Toulouse. Paris would be sort of like way up here. So Armagnac is a geographic region. The southwest of France historically was an independently ruled place until the French kings, the Capetians and the Bourbons, managed to unite the entire country under single rule. So the Duchy of Gascony basically encompassed the region of France that was located to the south into the west of Bordeaux, which is located here, one province south of Cognac. Why haven't I heard of Armagnac? Well, accidents of history and geography, and it's right here on the map. So, Cognac everybody in the world knows about. And you've had folks coming from around the world for hundreds of years to bring this spirit to the world by virtue of the fact of a happy accident of geography. La Rochelle, one of France's largest ports, located right here in the Charente, where Cognac is produced. So you've had names like Hennessy, an Irishman who showed up probably 200 or 300 years ago, like Hardy, the House of Hardy, also a prominent Cognac producer, English family that showed up 200 or 300 years ago because it was easy to jump on a boat up here in the United Kingdom, make your way down there and ship this stuff off to the world. Similarly with Bordeaux. Bordeaux is located upstream from the Bay of Biscay, but it's upstream, up the Garonne River to a point where it's still navigable. If you continue to proceed up the Garonne River from Bordeaux, eventually you hit Armagnac. But between when you depart Bordeaux and you reach Armagnac, the stream gets sufficiently shallow, sufficiently rapid, sufficiently rocky that they were unable to move ships up. And with the inability to move ships up, that also meant you were unable to move ships down. This stuff was landlocked. It was tucked away in a forgotten corner of France, away from the sea, away from the shipping lanes, away from trade, so that until recently, this has been a relatively unknown category. Little perspective. France usually produces in recent years about 3 million bottles of Armagnac per year. Sounds like a lot, right? 3 million? France produces 220 million bottles of Cognac a year. The production in Armagnac is a mere sliver of what's produced in Cognac. Why is that? Again, small scale production done by farmers typically working 20, 30 acre plots using the same methods that their parents, their grandparents, great-grandparents have used for generations because there was no industrialization of this stuff. There was no commoditization of this stuff. There were no big multinational spirits companies worth billions and billions of dollars like Remy Martin or Moet Hennessy, who basically established these massive houses that turned this entire region into a monoculture where all they grew were grapes for the production of the spirits. This is basically one of the food capitals of France as well, where a lot of what you think of as being traditional French country cooking comes from this region, whether it's escargot, whether it's your traditionally prepared duck, whether it's cassoulet, it all has its home in this region. How did we end up here? We had a little bit of experience with the category back in the Whistlepig days. We had released a product called the Boss Hog No. 4, the Black Prince, which I happily came up with the name for. Black Prince was an English prince, actually, who during the 100 Years' War, when the English monarchs believed they had a claim stemming back to William of Normandy, William the Conqueror, grandson, I believe, or perhaps great-grandson of Rollo, for any of you who are Viking fans. came across the channel from Normandy and established his own kingdom in Britain, but the family continued to have political claims over France. They pressed those claims in this border region, and so for a long time, this was English ruled. They didn't have much luck getting the spirits out because it was hard to get them out, but in any event, that was our first experience with Armagnac. Fell in love with it, using it as finishing casks for that whiskey, but then we decided someday we're going to do something with this spirit. And so we went into the Armagnac region. We had the good fortune to get an introduction to a lady by the name of Amanda Garnham, who's the head of public relations for the Armagnac Bureau, the BNIA, which basically acts as a trade association, tracks all of the production, gives you certificates of authenticity for your vintage years, which was important for us as we went in as outsiders trying to find the greatest old spirits in the world. And Amanda got us an introduction to a gentleman by the name of Jacques-Francois Riche du Perron, whose family had established probably, I would say, the preeminent negociant house. They lived in the house of the Marquis, who ruled the county of Armagnac, located here in Condom, which is in basically the heart of Armagnac, steps away from the local cathedral on the pilgrimage route of Santiago de Compostela. So we found this magnificent, probably 50-room chateau. It took me 3 days to figure out which way was up or down. I kept getting lost. I'd probably still need a map if I went back because it's been about a year. And then located across the courtyard from the great house itself, you find one of the most amazing, beautiful aging cellars you're ever going to encounter. Aging cellars that held stocks of vintage Armagnac that date back to 1868. The largest stock, we believe, of old spirit located in the region, and because Armagnac has the oldest stuff in the world, we think we have the largest stocks of old spirit in the world, period. And so, this old stuff that we found, how did we find it? I mean, how did this guy manage to amass these incredible stocks? Well, the Riche du Perron family were not first and foremost Armagnac merchants. They made most of their money as general merchants of French wine and spirit who sold their stuff to the Cunard lines. If any of you have seen the movie Titanic, back in the day before transatlantic airplane travel, if you wanted to make your way from France or England over to the United States, or from the United States over to Europe, couldn't get on a plane and it didn't take you 6 hours. You got on a boat and it took you 6 days. And I don't know if any of you have ever been on a cruise, but what do you tend to do on a cruise when you're sitting on a boat for 6 or 7 days with not a lot else to do? You might have a drink or two. And so that's how they made their fortune. All those bottles of French wine and spirit that are sitting 10,000 feet below the icy waters of the North Atlantic Ocean on the wreck of the Titanic were sold by this guy's great-grandfather to the Cunard lines. And so they had this independent source of wealth, independent stream of income, so they were under no pressure to sell their Armagnac. So they just kept collecting more and more of the old stuff, aging it deeper and deeper. And so that was this incredible stock that we found at the height of the pandemic, that we like to think that we acquired at relatively favorable pricing, that we can now then bring these incredible bargains to our consumers for spirit where there's basically nothing in the world comparable in terms of depth of age at the quantity at which we can bring it to you. So, production in Armagnac, how is it different than the other stuff we find in the world? Well, Cognac is probably the most obvious comparison because, like Armagnac, it's brandy. It's distilled fruit juice. You crush grapes, you ferment it into wine, you distill it into spirit, and you age it in oak. They do that in Cognac and they do that in Armagnac. But how is it different? Well, first, geography, right? Cognac is located directly on the sea. The sea tends to have, like large bodies of water, tend to have moderating effects on the climate. Armagnac's located further inland. So you get bigger swings between the hot days and the cool nights, and you get different soil and climatic conditions than you would find closer to the ocean, which tend to strain the vines. And the more you strain vines, the more intense, the more complex, the more flavorful the grapes tend to be, if any of you are wine fans. So geography matters. What else matters? Well, the grapes matter. In Cognac, 98% plus of the production made from a single grape, Uni Blanc, known to the Italians as Trebbiano. We also use Uni Blanc and Armagnac, but there are 10 different grapes authorized for the use of production of Armagnac as a spirit. What that means, the producers have a much broader palette of flavors to choose from when they're producing their spirit. They're not confined to a single grape, which tends to give off relatively consistent expressions. Although, look, to be fair, Napa Cab, you can get an incredible range of flavors based on, elevation, soil conditions, water, just the location of the stuff in the valley. But you can get much broader variety, much broader variation, much different flavors when you have different grapes entirely to play with, which they do in Armagnac. Distillation. Cognac, double distilled. Armagnac, almost all of it gets a single run through a traditional alembic still. When you're double distilling something, basically you're raising it up to a higher proof, you're stripping out more of the water, you're stripping out some more of the impurities, but you're also stripping out a lot of the flavor. When you have a single run through the still, you're coming off and going into the barrel at a lower proof. You're going into the barrel maybe with a little bit more harshness, but you're also going into the barrel with a ton more flavor, which has not been stripped out by virtue of that second run through the still. So how do we get rid of that harshness? Well, Armagnac does it through super deep aging. That's why Armagnac just begins to come into its own when it's 15, 20 years old. And that's why some of our oldest spirits can continuously spend up to over 70 years in the cask. Our 1946 vintage spent 76 years, I think, in wood between when it was distilled and when we finally pulled out and bottled it. Astounding longevity. And it's not a spirit where the oak overwhelms or predominates it. Well, why is that? Few reasons. The wood barrels that they use in Armagnac are somewhat different than what we use here in the States for aging whiskey. First and foremost, they're twice the size. What that means is less surface contact, less interaction between the spirit and the wood. Secondly, uses French oak, slower growing, tighter grain, less play between the wood and the spirit. Thirdly, less char. They're not using these alligator chars like you see with some of these whiskeys. It may just be a light toast. So there's not a lot of that caramelization of the wood, which then manifests itself in the spirit. And then finally, in addition to beginning the aging process in a much larger format wood container, the producers in the Armagnac region have many different size containers of much larger volume that they're able to play with in order to bring out the best in the spirit and basically to slow the interplay between the wood and the spirit by using these foudres or these foots, some of which are half the size of this room, some of which I think I've seen that are the size of this room, which basically allows continued evaporative loss of some of the more volatile and harsher elements in the spirit without drawing too much of the tannin, too much of the vanillins out of the wood and overly cooking the spirit, which frankly sometimes you see with whiskeys that are 20 years old. Vintage. That's the last and final thing that I'll say here about Armagnac. First and foremost, the producers in Armagnac are still wine producers. In Cognac, almost all of the wine that's made and almost all of the grapes that are grown are driven into the production of spirits. There's very little wine made here. Armagnac, first and foremost, these guys are winemakers. You can find some incredible Gascon wines on the shelves of your better liquor stores, and you can find them at a very reasonable price because this is still a relatively undiscovered category. And by the way, if you're ever doing an Armagnac tasting, I would encourage you to pick up a bottle of wine from Gascony, from the Armagnac region, made from Uni Blanc, made from Colombard, made in some cases from Foy Blanche. And that will allow you, I guess, to see what these grapes taste like in their wine form that form the structure upon which we then construct these incredible old spirits, this incredible old Armagnac. Taste the wine first, then have the spirit that's that wine distilled, and you see the family resemblance. But with Armagnac, we've got this vintage story. This is unlike anything else in spirits. Most brown spirits, the most you get on your bottle is an age statement. What that age statement tells you is how long that spirit sat in a wood cask. With this stuff, with our vintage Armagnacs, like the 1973 that I hold in my hand, you know that the grapes that went into producing this spirit were grown, harvested, crushed into juice, fermented into wine, distilled into spirit, and put in a bottle in a single year, in a single growing season. A tie to history that's unlike anything else in spirit, whether it's your personal history, if there's a monumental birth year or anniversary in a given vintage year, we've got the spirit for you, but also world history. At this point, we're looking back 5 decades, half a century, the Apollo missions, the Nixon impeachment, the Vietnam War winding down, the Cold War at its height. The fact, frankly, that some of this stuff survives to this day, whether it's the stuff from 1868 or even the stuff from 1973, given the challenges that the world presents to all of us, I suppose, it's near miraculous. So that's Armagnac. Armagnac 101. Until next time, Leo Gibson coming to you from the campus of Green Mountain College, Pulteney, Vermont. Cheers.